Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take a stack of sources, pull out the key nuggets, and really help you get well-informed fast. Today, we're looking at a pretty interesting presidential announcement. It wasn't just policy. It felt like a very deliberate strategic move, to reset the conversation, especially after a weekend full of health rumors, lots of speculation. The White House seemed keen to project, normal activity, a full agenda. Shift the focus away from succession talk and back to leadership. We've got 4 big headlines from that announcement to unpack. Each gives a slightly different angle in this strategy. We'll kick off with presidential health, the push to calm that narrative. Then this surprising shift for U.S. Space Command headquarters, also a really controversial promise about the National Guard in Chicago. And finally, a big legal move on tariffs that's heading towards the Supreme Court. It's quite a bit, but we're here to cut through all that noise and give you these essential insights.
Exactly. And these kinds of appearances, especially after a lot of speculation, they're almost never just random. When health rumors get going, they don't just, stay whispered in hallways. They can actually distract allies. They can worry markets. And like you said, really ramp up talk about succession, which isn't helpful. So putting the president out there looking orderly, it's a classic move, a very effective way to pull focus back to the agenda and just steady the ship perception-wise. This deep dive, it's not just about what he said, but really digging into why he said it and what that tells us.
Okay, let's jump into that first item then, the president's health. So after that weekend of chatter, what did the president and his doctor actually put out there?
Well, the president himself was pretty blunt about it. He just dismissed the rumors flat out, said he was active over the weekend, called the chatter false. Simple as that. And then his physician put out a brief note. Basically said some minor ankle swelling fits a common circulation thing, nothing serious, and a bruise on the hand, consistent with lots of handshakes, maybe combined with taking aspirin. The key takeaway from the doctor, nothing urgent was flagged. It was a very controlled message.
So not a deep dive into medical records.
Yeah.
Very targeted, minimal disclosure. Is there a risk, though, that being too brief could actually fuel more suspicion? Or was this the right call strategically? What's the thinking behind holding back?
That's a really good question. And I think the strategy here wasn't just about not giving details. It was using the lack of detail. The goal was pretty clearly to shut down the speculation without starting some long, drawn-out medical debate, Avoid creating new headlines about his health specifics. They offered a simple explanation, something plausible, and basically signaled, okay, let's move on. Look, without full test results, the public's mostly working off summaries anyway, so the idea is to encourage people to wait for the routine updates, not get caught up in rumor cycles. It's about starving the speculation, getting control back. And, this isn't new. Think back, FDR, Eisenhower, even more recently with President Trump. Administrations always walk this tightrope. How much transparency versus managing perception? It's tricky.
Okay, moving on from personal health, but still under this umbrella of showing an active presidency, a really big development for national security. U.S. Space Command headquarters moving. This isn't just paperwork, is it? What's the headline?
No, not at all. This is a major reversal, actually. The president announced the HQ for U.S. Space Command is shifting. It's going from Colorado Springs, Colorado, to Huntsville, Alabama. This basically flips a decision made by the previous administration to keep it in Colorado. And interestingly, the president specifically praised Huntsville, its capabilities, but then he also hinted, quite directly, that local voting practices in Colorado played a role in the decision.
Voting practices, wow, linking it like...
Yes, and just for clarity for everyone listening, U.S. Space Command runs the actual space operations for the military. U.S. Space Force is the service branch organizing, training the people. So we're talking about the command center, the operational hub, making the move.
Right. So beyond just packing boxes, which must be a huge undertaking itself, what's the deeper signal here? Feels like more than logistics, politics, strategy.
Oh, absolutely. It's strategy and politics, maybe even more than logistics right now. Look, these kinds of moves take years to actually happen, and they almost always face huge pushback from the state losing the command. Think about the jobs, the investment. For the military, sure, the top priority is making sure operations continue without a hitch. That's number one. But for the communities, gaining or losing a HQ like this is massive long-term, economically, prestige-wise. And the president mentioning voting practices, that's a clear political signal. It suggests, states might want to think about their political alignment if they want these kinds of federal investments. So, yeah, this is less about an immediate operational need and more about long-term positioning, both militarily and politically. Expect this to drag out. Debates, resistance from Colorado, maybe even legal fights. It's a power play. Definitely fits that narrative of projecting a strong, active presidency, deciding things, moving away from any succession chatter.
And sticking with that theme of projecting an active agenda, the president then turned to a really sensitive domestic issue, public safety. Specifically, a bold promise about Chicago and the National Guard. What did he actually say there, and how did that land?
He basically vowed to send the National Guard into Chicago. The stated reason was to help tackle the city's crime problems. But crucially, he didn't give any kind of timeline, no when, and the reaction from local leaders. Immediate and very negative. Both the state leaders in Illinois and city officials in Chicago, the governor, the mayor, they came out swinging, said they'd fight it. So right away, you have this set up for a major clash between federal, state, and local government.
Yeah, that sounds like a collision course. Which brings up the big question. Can a president just do that? Send in the Guard. If the governor and mayor are saying, no thanks, what's the legal situation?
Well, that's where it gets really complicated. It's potentially a legal minefield, frankly. You've got federal law, specifically something called the Posse Comitatus Act from way back in 1878. It puts pretty strict limits on using the military, even the Guard when it's federalized, for regular domestic law enforcement. Now, to override a state's objections, a president usually has to invoke the Insurrection Act, and that has very specific and historically pretty high bars, things like widespread insurrection, state authorities being totally unable to enforce federal law, or protecting civil rights. And even when it has been invoked, courts are generally very cautious about federal intervention like this. It touches on fundamental issues of states' rights, local control.
So it's not unprecedented, but it's rare and legally fraught.
Exactly. Think Little Rock in '57 with Eisenhower, or responses to riots in Detroit '67, LA '92. But often, even then, there was either a request from the state or a clear breakdown of state authority. Here, you have active, vocal objection from the state and city, public safety in cities, that's almost always run by local and state police, not the feds. So if the White House actually tries to push this through without state agreement, court challenges aren't just likely, they're practically guaranteed. The headlines sound strong, right? Decisive action. But the actual path to doing it, very uncertain, full of legal roadblocks and political resistance. It makes a statement, but the action itself is TBD.
Okay, one more piece from this announcement. Trade. The administration's taking a big step after an appeals court ruling on tariffs. Sounds like this could ripple through the economy. What's happening?
Right. So the administration announced they plan to ask the Supreme Court to essentially fast-track a case. This comes after an appeals court ruled that most of the Section 301 tariffs on Chinese goods were imposed unlawfully. Now, it's really important for businesses listening to understand, while this appeal is happening, the tariffs themselves, they're still in place. They haven't gone away. Imports are still subject to these duties as the case works its way up. So for now, companies are still dealing with that cost, but there's this big legal question mark hanging over the whole thing long term.
Okay, so what does that mean going forward? For businesses, for trade policy overall? Supreme Court involvement could bring clarity or maybe just more confusion. What's the so what?
Yeah, the so what is pretty big here. That appeals court ruling really calls into question how much power the government has to use these broad emergency powers for wide-ranging trade actions like tariffs. This specific legal fight has implications way beyond just the China tariffs. It could potentially limit the president's toolkit on trade policy in the future. But even if the Supreme Court does shut down this particular way of imposing tariffs, you have to remember, there are other trade tools the executive branch can use. Using those, though, that would probably just trigger a whole new wave of lawsuits, more debate, more uncertainty. And businesses, as you know, hate uncertainty. They need predictability for planning, for investment. Moving targets are the worst. So what we're likely looking at here is less a quick win or loss and more a long, slow legal chess match, a back and forth. Companies will be watching the courts very closely before making any big supply chain moves or investment decisions. Policy shifts, if they come, will likely be gradual, not sudden. It keeps everyone kind of on edge.
And there you have it. Looking back at this whole announcement, you really see the strategy, don't you? It was about projecting normalcy, showing active governance, pushing back on those health rumors, and highlighting this full agenda: health, defense with Space Command, public safety in Chicago, trade law. These 4 different headlines, they might seem unconnected at first, but they all really tie back to this bigger theme: presidential leadership and that constant, careful job of managing public perception, especially in today's news environment.
Exactly right. And as you think about all this, maybe consider this. How often is a public statement, especially from the very top, designed not just to give you facts, but specifically to manage how you perceive things, particularly when you know legal battles or political fights are probably coming down the road? What does that complexity tell you about governing today? And maybe more importantly, how should we as citizens trying to stay informed approach these official announcements? It suggests there's often more going on beneath the surface than just the words themselves.
That's a really potent thought to end on. Layers upon layers. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you feel better equipped now to follow these stories as they unfold. Until next time, keep digging.